Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai, haere mai. Welcome everyone to today's webinar on Good Practice Guides for Skill Standards. I'm Eve Price, Portfolio Manager at ConCOVE Tūhura, and I'm really pleased to be here with you all for this kōrero. As you may know, New Zealand's vocational education system is shifting from unit standards to skill standards. This is a big change, and understanding how to navigate it is crucial. That's why, with the support from Waihanga Ara Rau, the Construction and Infrastructure Workforce Development Council, ConCOVE Tūhura has developed the Good Practice Guides for Skill Standards. This is the only resource of its kind specifically designed for skill standards. It provides targeted, practical guidance for different users, helping you implement good practice with confidence. With the first skill standards rolling out in early 2024, these guides couldn't come at a better time. Whether you're involved in standard setting, qualification development, program delivery, assessment, or moderation, these guides are here to support you. But first of all, what is a skill standard and how does it differ from unit standards? Well, initially, they are compulsory for national qualifications. This was not the case with unit standards. There is more integration of knowledge and skill, which traditionally have been separate in unit standards. Skill standards are written for assessors and not learners. The specification of assessment conditions are not specification of assessment practices. The indication of content or curriculum is included without prescription. And most importantly, they involve a different SSB relationship. Today, we'll explore why skill standards matter, how these guides were developed, and most importantly, how you can use them effectively in your work. By the end of this session, we want you to feel confident in applying the good practice guides in your role. This is an interactive session, so if you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A. We'll do our best to answer them as we go. There is also a dedicated session at the end for questions. Today, we have three fantastic panelists. Michelle Tiatia from Waihanga Ara Rau, Dr. Karen Vaughan from Hummingbird Effect, and Dr. Selina Chan from Ara Institute of Canterbury. Let's start by introducing our panelists. Michelle, I'll hand to you first. Could you please introduce yourself?
Kia ora koutou, ko Michelle Tiatia, tōku ingoa. I'm a qualifications manager with Waihanga Ara Rau, and which is a construction infrastructure workforce development council, and have a background of over 20 years in education, which 15 of those plus were working directly with learners.
Thank you very much. Karen.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Karen, and I'm a director of Hummingbird Effect and an author of these guides along with Andrew Keir, and I've had a long career in education research on workplace learning and career pathways.
Thank you very much. Selina, over to you.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Selina Chan ngā ingo whanau. So I'm an educational developer at Ara Institute of Canterbury. My role there is to help with program development and curriculum development, also with quite a bit of capability building. I also have been privileged to have a bit of time set aside for research, and some of you might have seen some of the work that I have published on with regards to apprentices. Thank you.
Thank you, Selina. Michelle, we'll start with you if you don't mind. Michelle is here representing Waihanga Ara Rau, the SSB, the standard setting body for construction and infrastructure. Can you please tell us what are skill standards and why is it essential to understand them?
A really good question. I think when understanding skill standards, it's first important to understand the role of a skill standard within the system of vocational education. Mm-hmm. So what the job of a skill standard is and what the job isn't. As you mentioned, Eve, the function of a skill standard is to describe the skills that is valued by industry and to provide really clear benchmark of the level to which that skill is performed or demonstrated. For our construction and infrastructure industries, we know they value consistency and quality and that they like having standards-based qualifications. So for us, understanding skill standards is crucial for a couple of reasons. With skill standards where they exist being listed in qualifications and micro-credentials, this means they will be compulsory in programs, and understanding the role and components of skill standards helps us to optimise the opportunities that exist for industry learners, industry associations and providers. So particularly for our team of qualification developers, they play a really pivotal role as navigators in this process. They guide the development of skill standards and ensure that they are aligned to both the industry needs and the qualifications they're intended for. And they also provide clarity for providers who use the standards to design their assessments. So this alignment will be really essential for enabling providers to create relevant and effective programs that meet the demands of the workforce. And then with the move to skill standards, there's a real opportunity that comes about for collaboration and will enable a positive change in this transition. So with everyone in the skill standard process having a shared understanding of skill standards, we can work together more closely, demonstrating our commitment to the principles that you talked about.
Thank you very much, Michelle. So that's sort of the standard setting side, the people that develop the standards. Selena, I wonder if we could hear from you from a provider's perspective. Why is it important to understand skill standards?
Thank you, Eve. So skill standards are basically a natural progression from unit standards-based qualifications, which we in Aotearoa, New Zealand have been using for decades. Aotearoa, New Zealand is also well known internationally to be innovators in the qualification and skills recognition space. We were one of the first to set up our national qualifications in the 1990s. And we also moved to anchoring our qualifications on graduate profiles. That took place about a decade ago. And our registration of micro-credentials into our framework is often seen as an international example. So we do good stuff. So as our qualifications are now based on graduate outcomes, skill standards provide a better connection and alignment with this more holistic approach to recognizing skills, knowledge, and attributes which everyone attains through education and practice. So instead of having unit standards, and many of them, we now have sets of skill standards. So advantages of skill standards from a provider and learner point of view. With less standards as such, assessments are less complicated, less of them. There is a clearer line of sight to the graduate profiles. There is a clearer indication of what learning outcomes need to be achieved, and that provides a better guide for our konga and for curriculum developers and for kaiko and teachers. As with other types of NZQA standards, assessment of skill standards may be completely competency-based or grade-based. This provides better alignment between learning outcomes and assessment methods. So if you're looking at learning outcomes that assess a skill, then you will probably have a practice-based assessment rather than writing things out. Grade-based results also provide incentives for recognition of craftsmanship or craftspersonship. As we all know, you can be competent just by being able to complete a standardized process. But there are degrees of competency. So allowing for grades gives us the opportunity to reward people to attain higher performance. So therefore, I think it's important that all of us involved in vocational education get our heads around what skill standards are and their role in the qualification ecosystem. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Eve.
Thank you, Selena. And that's very much why ConCOVE has developed these guides. We saw this as an opportunity to bring different parts of the system together to navigate this change collectively. Michelle, obviously, Waihanga Ara Rau has played a key role. Could you share a bit about why you were engaged in this work?
So the timing was amazing for Waihanga Ara Rau. We were in the process of doing some deep thinking around skill standards and how we would develop those and some principles that would sit behind our team's practice. So the timing was great, and the principles that we were working towards really started to align with the principles of this project. So we thought it was an opportunity to increase our continuity and transparency for everyone involved in the ecosystem, rather than it just being our team at the time. And being involved in this project helped us to build on a solid foundation that we had in place. And then we got to, with this being interwoven with our professional development journey, our team could engage with the likes of Karen and Andrew and other external parties and get that external perspective. So the collaboration has been incredibly valuable, providing us with opportunities for growth and enhancing the overall process. Contributing to the development of the good practice guides continues for that room for improvement, particularly hearing from industry and providers. So being involved in the project allowed our team to gain insights from the industry's experience throughout the process of developing skills standards, and hearing their perspectives has been really invaluable. This has helped us to shape standards based on real-world experiences and feedback. And then it also allowed us to hear some of those hesitations are from other parties like providers. So it's important for us as Waihanga Ara Rau to be able to address those concerns. And by acknowledging the concerns, we can create a more effective and supportive system for everyone involved.
Thanks, Michelle. Great to hear that it was helpful for you as much as you guys were helpful for the guides. Let's dive into what they cover. Karen, as a co-author of the Good Practice Guides, can you please walk us through what's in them and, more importantly, why they can be trusted?
So Andrew and I wrote the guides for people working in qualifications development and implementation roles. And there's 6 different guides, and each one addresses a different type of work with skills standards and how that work can connect with other parts of the vocational education system. So in very practical terms, the guides cover 3 big things. How the overall vocational education system works and how its wider context shapes what skills standards are and what they should do. Secondly, the good practice principles that should guide any work done that uses skills standards. And thirdly, there's lots of examples in the guides that interpret and illustrate the principles so that you can see what good looks like. And essentially, these guides are a resource to help people make the best possible decisions. They are not a checklist. They are not rigid rules. We know there's lots of variation and unpredictability in the system, and it's always shifting. What we want is to aid people's thinking on interpreting the guidance appropriate to their situation. So their industries, or your industries, your providers, your learners, your business models. And the aim is to provide good guidance that encourages autonomy and initiative. So you can trust the guides because they're built on a sort of 3-part foundation. First, we did what all good researchers do. We reviewed the local and international literature, all the academic books, the applied research, the cabinet papers, the theses, and we wanted to know, what does the literature say about what supports systems and practices related to qualifications development and use, and where are the key areas of debate. And that gave us a good high-level and theoretical sense of where to put our attention. And then second, Andrew and I drew on our own experience and expertise in vocational education. So between us, we've led major research projects. We've had senior roles in ITO leadership and ITP governance. We've served on ministerial advisory groups. We've worked closely with stakeholders and communities of practice. And we've also each worked at the coalface as teachers and assessors in the senior secondary system and the tertiary education system. And Andrew developed the BCITO's workplace assessment model, and he built its community of practice of 200 assessors and moderators. And I, for my part, established NZCER's vocational learning platform. And basically, we love writing guides that are principled and practical. That's just a sweet spot for us. So we knew from the start how important it would be to develop these guides with the sector, which is the 3rd part of the foundation of these, which we called capability building workshops. What we did was create early draft guidance, and we workshopped it with different teams and different sector entities. So what you see in the final published guides has already been field tested and refined and validated by the sector. And it incorporates specific challenges and insights from the sector, so that we talked about with them. And taking this approach allowed us to build sector capability where it was needed, not after the guides were published, but actually along the way. And that's also, built a groundswell of interest and some confidence for people about what is, for many, something quite new. And so, Eve, you asked about what makes it credible. It's that three-part foundation. It's built on existing research, long-standing leadership and expertise, and the sector's own input. And it means the guides can, between all of them, address the full range of entities, experiences and business models in the sector. So we've tried to account for people or entities with little or no experience with standards and standards-based assessment, including not knowing that skill standards even existed. We've also tried to account for people who've worked with unit standards, but they didn't know how skill standards were different or what skill standards might mean for their business model. And we've also tried to account for all the variations you get within the same type of sector entity, different business models or different business as usual practices, different internal targets, variations in capability and capacity internally, and different stakeholder sensitivities. So Andrew and I, we're the co-authors of these guides, but it's the sector that's co-developed and ratified them. There's one more important point here. NZQA have their own guidelines for listing skill standards on the Directory of Assessment and Skill Standards. We liaised with NZQA throughout the project. What we wanted to do was ensure that our guides sit comfortably alongside NZQA's guidelines. They're not a replacement for them. And the way they fit together is like this. NZQA's guidelines are mostly about what to do, what's required. And our guides are more about how to do it and why. And the other key difference is NZQA's guidelines are about the approval and listing of skill standards, of course, because that's NZQA's realm. And qualifications developers should absolutely still be reading NZQA's guidelines. But our guides are actually addressing the entire system. So from industry and stakeholder input to development of the skill standards, to delivery through programs of learning, through to assessing and moderating.
Thank you very much, Karen, and I'll echo something I've said to you before throughout this project. What I've particularly enjoyed is not only the what, but the how Karen and Andrew have gone about this work. Thank you. Selina, over to you. Could you tell us, how do these guides support providers like yours in delivering high-quality training and assessment?
Thank you, Eve, and thank you, Karen, for that overview. So skill standards provide a bit more sort of detail for providers. So in that, it becomes useful. There is some indication of delivery methods, but they're not prescribed, how skill standards can be sequenced, and the connections between various skill standards in a qualification. The guides that Andrew and Karen have worked on provide the background, because I think that's, the why, mechanisms, the how, guidance and examples, which I think are very important because, you can see yourself in some of these processes. It helps you understand how they could be used in your context. So as we change in how we do things, having clear and concise information is always very helpful. So thank you, Karen. The guidelines go some way to provide resources to inform the way forward. Of importance is that the guides draw on sound research base from Andrew and Karen's many years of experience and scholarship, and from Korero with a range of stakeholders, including people who will be working with skill standards. Therefore, I think the guides actually provide an extremely good resource to help providers and industry understand what are skill standards and the impact on the way ARCO and assessments can work.
Thank you very much, Selina. Very helpful to understand, indeed, how you're using these guides. Let's talk about how our audience can get the most out of these guides. Karen, could you please walk us through how they're structured and introduce the colour coding system to help users navigate them effectively?
Yeah. Basically, we structured the guides so that people could find and zero in on what they need on a just-in-time basis, or take a broader view and read everything, or just mix and match, as you wish. So it's not one long document. It's actually a toolkit, and it's made up of different guides, and you can read them in almost any order, and anyone in the system can read them whenever you need. Each guide addresses a very particular work role in the system, so qualification developer, programs developer, tertiary teachers, trainers, assessors, moderators, industry representatives. So they're therefore also addressing a different entity role in the system. So standard setting bodies, or the role of ITOs, or the role of ITPs, and so on. And they're also therefore also addressing a real range of different expertise and operating models. And so the guides do actually discuss the drivers and the challenges and the opportunities specific to each role, and they explicitly connect that work to the rest of the system. So the main audience for each guide is actually indicated by the guide's title. For example, assessment and consistency measures, that's a guide most relevant for assessors and moderators. But a secondary audience for each guide is whoever's working upstream or downstream of the work being discussed. So program developers and ITOs, ITPs and PTEs work upstream of assessors. So they're going to find it useful to understand how assessors take up the results of program development. And moderators, in the same way, they're going to find it useful to look at the guidance for program developers who work upstream of them. 2 of the guides are actually relevant for everybody, regardless of role. That is the overview of the system and the background to the emergence of skill standards. Those 2 guides are designed to help you understand how and why we got to where we are now, and what the principles are that govern how it all works. To help everybody kind of navigate their way through, we've designed a 2-tiered colour coding system. So each guide's got a different colour, it's easily identified, and then secondly, we classified all the topics against those colour codes. So if, for example, you were really interested in a topic like combining skill and knowledge, or credit values, you can easily see which of the guides discuss that topic. And we did that for a very good reason, and that is that although each guide addresses a particular job that's being done, like program development, understanding the wider context and system is really important, and that's because we're really interested in achieving much better learner and industry outcomes, and you can do that if all the parts of the system are working well together.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Karen. I think the colour coding is a really practical way to navigate and to find exactly what you're looking for when you need it. Michelle, from a WDC perspective, how are these guides being used in your work, and how do they support standard setting and industry alignment?
Beautiful. And as someone who has actually read every guide to cover, they are really valuable, and they provide that structured framework of principles along with those examples. So instead of having a rigid set of rules, having principles that you can draw on, because we know in our world that there's lots of depends and lots of variation. So for me, as someone who's developing skill standards, I often turn the principles into a phrase that I will repeat in my head as I'm reviewing or developing skill standards. And that helps to ensure that standards are consistent and clear. So I turn the principles basically into an evaluative question. So like as a really quick example, when I'm thinking about the concept of skill standards being transferable or portable, I think about what other trades a skill standard might be relevant to. And I would internalise, is enough context for clarity without creating a barrier. So that would determine if I am referring to the construction environment or a specific trade where the context does matter. So it helps to form a judgment rather than a checklist that I need to work towards, and it helps with that maintaining of a high standard and clarity through that development process. Our involvement in supporting the development of these guides demonstrates our commitment to the principles that are in them. And by adhering to these principles, it helps navigate the changes effectively and have support that for others to adapt and thrive with these changes. I think one of the great things about these guides is that they aim for that transparency and the collaboration amongst all parties in the system. So they make it really clear what's expected from everyone, upstream and downstream, and how each participant can contribute. So it really does open that collaborative environment for everyone, and so that we're all working on the same page, and that's that common goal of standard setting and industry alignment.
Thanks, Michelle. Selena, similar question to you. How are you using these guides in your organisation?
Yes, thank you. So At the moment, there are not many school standards registered as yet. However, as the review process comes along, because all qualifications and all programs are reviewed every 5 years, we will find school standards becoming more and more part of the assessment system and the whole qualifications ecosystem. So as they're rolled out, they will tend to be, you will have to sort of work out how to actually use them to support learning, because that's the purpose of them. So we need to structure our programs, align learning outcomes in courses to school standard outcomes, and also match our assessments and the methods that we use to assess to the school standards. We can design more holistic assessments, drawing on what could be provided with digital technologies to support more personalized learning for our learners. And school standards, because of their more holistic nature, lend themselves to this openness to flexibility and innovation. So obviously, all of this change requires capability development for our CAICO and our assessors and moderators. So as each existing qualification is reviewed and school standards are incorporated, we will run workshops for our CAICO to work out what are the differences, but they're actually not that many, and provide opportunities to relook at how learning is developed and assessed. So from a capability point of view, it's a very good sort of reason to actually revisit practice. As with all change, the inclusion of school standards does give us the opportunity for us to talk to CAICO and to improve not only assessments, but also the ARCO that underpins the assessments. So the guidelines, really provide a good resource. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, thank goodness. Everyone's pressed for time. So the guidelines are there. We can select the relevant ones to use, and we would use them in workshops to anchor our discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, Lena. I think that's a great insight into how these guides are being applied in a real learning environment. And I particularly like the idea of you workshopping the guides to make them relevant to your own contexts. I think that's particularly important for providers to do. Well, thank you very much. Hopefully this discussion has given everyone a clear understanding of why these guides were developed, what they cover, and how to use them effectively. We do have a few questions in already. But we'll start with one for Karen, please. How were industry involved in the project?
Yes. We did it in two ways. Firstly, we observed a number of advisory group meetings where industry representatives were working with qualifications developers. And then, secondly, we talked with those industry representatives from those groups without the qualifications developer present. There's nothing sinister in that, but just so people could feel free to speak their mind. What's it like being in an advisory group? Where are your challenges? What's been surprising and interesting? And so we asked all about their experience of providing technical guidance for skills standards development, what motivated their involvement, what the benefits were for them. And what they told us actually led us to write some specific sections in the guides about working with industry and other stakeholder advisors, and those are in the guides for qualifications development and the guide for program development. And it also led us to write a separate guide just for industry advisors, actually, just to give those people a big picture of where they fit in the system and what their role is and what it's not.
Yes. Thank you very much. If you do have questions of your own, please drop them in the Q&A section of the chat and we will address them on camera now. So I think the next question maybe is for you, Michelle. Someone represents an industry and they have just written assessments and training material for unit standards. And apparently you have been of huge assistance doing this. The question is, are we going to have to go through all that again as the unit standards become still standards?
Over time. So the whole process, I'm not sure how many unit standards there are on the framework. I think Waihanga Ara Rau look after about 3,000 standards. So it's not possible to do these all at once. And one of the things the approach that we're taking at Waihanga Ara Rau is using or utilising existing review cycles of qualifications. So there is a standard practice, and it is good practice to relook and review your programs and assessments, and that generally happens in about a 5-year cycle. So if something has just been reviewed and it was registered and listed in 2023, there's a good chance that it might not be scheduled for review for a number of years. We're really conscious of the amount of resource and effort it takes to move, and are conscious of we would like to see things done well for providers and for learners. So we are cognizant, and those are the things that when I mentioned we like to hear from providers about their concerns. But we won't be doing all 3,000 this year.
It's definitely a work in progress and a change process over several years for all involved. Yes, thank you. I think this next one might be for you as well, if you don't mind. Although Karen, you may have a view as well. The question is around how skill standards contribute to NCEA achievements.
So really great question, and I'm not sure, 2 parts to this. Skills standards or any standard that it's on the directory of assessment and achievement standards can contribute to NCEA level 1, 2 and 3. So like unit standards, skill standards will still contribute to NCEA. If the question is asking around NCEA endorsement, where Selena mentioned they can be graded, that is also an option in future where it won't contribute to a subject endorsement but can contribute to the endorsement at the certificate level.
Karen, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Michelle's got it.
This one, I'm going to ask it, but it may be a question that we have to do some consultation on and come back and answer separately. So the question is, what and how do these skill standards work with Standards New Zealand and ISOs?
Really good question. I'm not quite sure of the answer to that, other than as part of a consultation process, we would always ensure where there's relevant standards that relate to the skill that they reflect the current standards, which is why it's so valuable for industry to contribute to those discussions, because they're the ones that are using and working with the standards that relate to their area of field.
Thank you. We have a question as well asking if there will be literacy and numeracy skill standards. That is something that is looked after by NZQA, as they are the standard setting body for those sorts of topics. So in time, I have no doubt that the existing unit standards that NZQA are responsible for, and literacy and numeracy are one of those, will be turned into skill standards over time. I'm just checking as other questions are coming in thick and fast. Selena, a question for you, if you don't mind. Could you please offer some insights into how you use the indicative content part of the skill standard regarding training resource creation? Do you try and cover all the elements in the indicative content, or use it as the title says, indicative? This appears to be very similar to previous range statements. Perhaps you could clarify that.
Well, as you say, indicative means that they're not compulsory. I think it's very important to, when we write indicative statements, to actually check that they are current, that they are relevant. It's very, very tempting to put everything that you can think of into the indicative statements. But I think it's important to remember the context in which the skill standards are going to be enacted within. So if a skill standards, for instance, in our case, is being used in a pre-trade program at an ITP or PTE, then the indicative sort of resources and activities will mirror industry practice, but probably maybe in a slightly different way. Whereas in industry, where various parts of industries might have specialist practices, then you would try and make sure that those are actually accounted for and assessed. So indicative really does mean indicative. Yeah, but it's a guide.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Fiona, fantastic question online here. Will skill standards in time replace unit standards in NCEA? And that's a question that our panelists do not have the answer for. This is perhaps an NZQA question, but definitely a good question and one worth asking. If we are to understand that skill standards are to replace unit standards, then logically one might assume that will indeed be the case. A question for you, Karen, maybe, given your role in all of this and the helicopter view of the system that you have. Are current education and industry policies flexible enough to adapt to new skill standards?
That is a big question.
It is.
Well, yes, in theory. I mean, again, I'm probably speaking in generalisations here too, but I think there's a lot more flexibility in the system and in the vocational education system and in the broadly in the education system. There's a lot more flexibility than people often realise. That's been the case. Well, since someone's brought up the NCEA, think of the NCEA or NCEAs because there's different levels.
Yes.
Think of those. Right from the start, there was loads of flexibility, but schools didn't necessarily kind of use all of that or really grapple with that. So in theory, there's quite a lot of flexibility. I think what the important thing is what enables people to actually recognise the flexibility and then actually make the most out of that. And it's I think a question of people getting to grips with understanding what's going on in the system, so that they can see there's lots of space in it.
Yeah. What's already available to us to play with. Yes, yeah. Thank you very much. Michelle, maybe another question for you. Somebody is saying that this is an excellent and useful piece of work, so thank you all for your involvement in this. But also the question is, how is this being shared across other WDCs?
I'm aware of community of practices that happen across WDCs, and particularly from our GM levels to the qual manager levels, and I know that each WDC reflects and serves a different industry group, so it's then really important to have community of practices internally around what or how these are best implemented within their WDCs. But everyone in the WDCs is aware of these good practice guides,
absolutely.
which is important. And I think it's really important that there's kind of like shared conversations across, but then also internally within each WDC to make the most out of them for their industries.
I'll also share that I have been contacted prior to the official publication of these guides. I was contacted by a few managers and general managers asking for a sneak preview. So the interest is definitely there from other WDCs who were not involved in the project. How are the current challenges of assessing learners? And there are a few examples here. Language barriers, for example, ESOL learners, measuring soft skills, authenticity, for example, AI. How are they being addressed in these guides or with skill standards in general? Perhaps, Selina, you might want to tackle that one.
I think those items mentioned are always going to be challenges, regardless of what we do to the qualifications. They really are things that need to be solved or looked at or supported, depending on which item it is, through a good understanding of what is the learning outcome to be achieved and the context that the learners are working in or learning in. And for good educators, kayako, and program developers to actually work at providing a process, resources, delivery systems, support systems that would work. So skill standards themselves basically provide a framework, but what happens outside and within that is very much a support of learning and learners process. I mean, we don't have time to sort of discuss any of those items in great detail, but each one of them actually requires a solid correro with the people that are working with those challenges.
Yeah, I think I'd add, while maybe one or two of those things might appear somewhere in a guide, that the important thing is that the principles that govern how to think about these things are in the guide. So, I think I said earlier, it's not a checklist or a rigid set of rules. You still have to do thinking, but it's fun thinking, and it's satisfying thinking, and so there'll always be things. Right now, it might be GPT. In 6 months there'll be another issue. But the questions that you need to think about, why does this matter? How should I think about it? What things should I weigh up? Those you'll find principles about that in the guides, and then you can apply it to all sorts of specific things that come up.
Thank you. This question is for all three. And I think it's a particularly interesting question. What aspects surprised you during the project? Do you have any take-home messages that you'd like to share with the audience? Who would like to go first?
I don't think it's surprising because skill standards are in evolution from having thousands of unit standards to actually bringing them towards a much more holistic view of how learning occurs. So, it is actually an evolutionary process, and I know that other qualification developers overseas are interested in how we have gone down the road to develop skill standards, and they're looking at it with some interest. Yes.
No pressure.
No pressure.
It might sound like a small thing, but I was kind of surprised to hear from industry representatives that one of the draw cards for them in advising on the development of skill standards, a draw card was meeting other people from industries, but also hearing about skills in different contexts. When you think about it, it's kind of logical, isn't it? You're so kind of buried in your own context. But they were really interested to hear about how those skills would play out in entirely different contexts. A construction site here, a prison yard there, or things like that. They were fascinated by that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Michelle?
I don't know kind of where to start. There's a few different surprises. I think to Karen's point, it was like taking a moment to be out of my world and hearing these perspectives and thinking around, and it forced thinking around the implementation of skill standards and what this means for qualification alignment, what this means for industry training, what it means for providers who currently have maybe 600 learners in a program leading to a current qualification that's unit standard based. So it was thinking around that implementation, hearing the perspectives, and just a really good chance to, build on community of practice and collaborate, because one person doesn't have all the ideas. So it was, that shared collaborative process and the capability of building workshops that was the different perspectives, I think. Wasn't so much, I wouldn't say a surprise, but something that I got a lot of value out of.
Oh, good. I'm glad you benefited from the process as well. A question here about the link between skill standards and micro-credentials. How closely linked are the new entities, skill standards, with the rise of micro-credential learning, and have they been developed as a way to chunk learning via block courses, etc.?
Micro-credentials, yeah. Micro-credentials have always been, well, the original premise of micro-credentials is actually to fill the gaps in a way, and to allow for new developments, new skills, which were not covered by existing unit standards to be recognized. So it will always have a role. So maybe in the evolutionary qualifications framework, some micro-credentials will become skill standards because they become normal.
Yes, almost redundant.
So, and new micro-credentials will also emerge. So yeah, I mean, it's all part of the way in which we as humans, are innovative and develop, and how qualifications frameworks seek to try and capture some of that.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, that is the time we have for live questions, but we will be sending out a bonus Q&A recording to answer the remaining questions. Thank you very much for putting your questions in the chat. We will address them separately on another recording. That brings us to the end of today's webinar. A huge thank you to my three panelists, Dr. Karen Vaughan, who was one of the lead authors of these reports, Dr. Selina Chan for your involvement, and of course Michelle Tiatia and Waihanga Ara Rau's involvement in the whole project. Thank you for sharing your insights and expertise. It's been a really valuable discussion, and I can tell from the chat already that it has also been valuable to you out there. I'm sure you're all leaving with some great learnings on how to effectively use these good practice guides. To our audience, thank you for joining us and for your thoughtful questions. We'll be sharing the recording and the presentation slides with you, so keep an eye on your inbox. If you found today's session valuable, please make sure to subscribe to ConCOVE's newsletter at concove.ac.nz to stay up to date with our future events. Don't miss our next webinar on the 6th of May, which is around policy settings for apprentices, where to from here. We'll be unpacking our latest research into government support for apprenticeships with insights from industry leaders and policy experts. Registrations will open soon. Stay tuned for the link. Ngā mihi nui. Have a great rest of your day.